How do you do, ladies and gentlemen of the year 2020? Welcome to KFRA's effort for the Time Capsule, a special after sign-off tape recording session being held in our KFRA studios on this night of May 22nd, 1970. The tape on which will be sealed and buried on the St. Mary Parish Courthouse Square here in Franklin tomorrow, in conjunction with the dedication of the new 7-story Parish Courthouse building. I'm Chris Dupleshin, Executive Vice President and General Manager of KFRA. With me tonight from our staff, aside from other local invited guests for the program, is John M. Petrie, Chief Engineer for KFRA and Assistant Manager, who will act as Master of Ceremonies for this taping session. I think it would be a good place to start off, John, if you would tell our audience about the mechanics we're using in this taping session tonight.
Good enough, Chris. We're taping this full track on a Roberts recorder at 3 3/4 inches per second. That's 3 3/4 inches per second. Just a little note, perhaps, to our technical engineers in the year 2020. We are a 1390 station, 1390 kilohertz. Incidentally, kilohertz has just recently come into vogue in the last 2 years. Before that, we always referred to it as kilocycles. And we operate with a power output of 500 watts, one 833A final, and we are a directional station, 2-tower directional with a figure 8 pattern, roughly along U.S. Highway 90. In case you're wondering just how far the state-of-the-art has come, most of our equipment here is still tube-type equipment. We do have some transistorized equipment, but transistors at the present time are still not capable of coming out with much power output. So as a result, even though some of our equipment is transistorized, our power equipment mostly is still tube-type. We came on the air, KFRA did, in June 4th or 5th, in the year 1961. So we're a little over we will be 9 years old next month. With me today in our studios, we have certain guests who will be joining us in an unrehearsed dialogue, taking a look at various aspects of Franklin 1969. We just recently celebrated our 150th birthday, and that's the reason for the tape. As Chris mentioned a moment ago, it will be sealed in the Time Capsule. With me tonight is Miss Florence Blackburn, who is manager of the Franklin Chamber of Commerce and also was co-chairman of our Franklin Sesquicentennial. Good night, Florence. How are you?
Hello.
And also in our studios at the present time is Mr. Raymond Lockett, who is an educator and a teacher, and also has been for the past 4 years and recently re-elected as chairman of the St. Mary Community Action Program. Raymond, how are you?
How are you, John?
And joining us a little bit later will be Mayor J.M. Fernandez of Franklin. He'll be with us in a few minutes. And also on tape recording, because he wasn't able to be here tonight, is our unofficial historian, Mr. William T. Shin, who is an abstractor, and during our sesquicentennial he was on the air with us to talk about Franklin's history, and I think he has some interesting comments. Perhaps those of you in 50 years from now will find our Billy's backwards look at history interesting. We also will segment our tape in such a fashion to where we will also talk about current events. We'll also take a look at what's been making the news over the last few years. And also, we will take a look at the music scene. What has been popular over the last 5 or 10 years, what is popular today, and what has caused this popularity. In other words, the major shifts in music. We will be spinning some of the current recordings for you also for posterity and or for our progeny, rather, in the year 2020. First of all, we'd like to take a look at our sesquicentennial that we just went through just recently, and so we'd like to ask Florence Blackburn, who served as co-chairman, to take a look at our sesquicentennial. And Florence, I think you've recovered by now, huh?
Florence is going to start off by correcting you like she did me.
Oh.
Give him the right word, Florence.
Oh, sesquicentennial.
Yeah.
He did it very well.
Oh, well.
I think he did. I wasn't listening very much. I mean, I wasn't checking his English. I mean, yes, we've just celebrated the sesquicentennial, which, as you know, is 150 years. The actual celebration was on the weekend of April the 24th, 25th, and 26th. We did a lot of things commemorating the origin of Franklin. The date is actually the 150 years dates from the time that Franklin was officially made the parish seat of St. Mary. Actually, there was a village here sometimes before that. Franklin was founded in 1808, and it acted as a parish seat from 1811. Included in the celebration was a pageant depicting some of the historical events of the past, a parade with floats along a similar theme of things that we had in Franklin during the 150 years. We had a village on the bank by Teche. Franklin, like many of the villages in this area, is located on the bayou for reasons of transportation, and we attempted in this little village to duplicate some of the shops and business establishments that might have been here at that time.
We might point out we had a thriving business from visitors from the surrounding area who came to Franklin and joined us in our festivities. Florence, one thing I thought especially interesting was the antebellum gowns and everything else that, or actually even predates the antebellum area 150 years ago. The gowns that all these ladies wore, and the men who had went through a lot of suffering to grow beards.
All in all, how would you say it went, though? Better than you expected, Florence, or not as well, the celebration?
Oh, it was quite successful, and everyone was very enthusiastic about it. I think we had a lot of preliminary events that helped to make the enthusiasm contagious. People tend to get into the spirit of the thing when they saw others wearing the costumes, and we had a fashion show about a month in advance. And of course, as John said, the men began to grow the beards quite early too. So with these old-fashioned costumes and customs, we got an early start, and a lot of comments were made about the number of people who joined into the costume thing.
Florence, we want some of your comments looking into the future in 50 years from now. Before we do that, one thing that we are asking all of our guests tonight to do is tell us a little bit about themselves, because maybe 50 years from now they'll want to know exactly who Florence Blackburn was. So being a lady on our panel, we're not going to ask you to give us your age.
Oh, you're stealing. I was going to say you have to say that. So we're going to have to flip here. You know, history has to be documented. Florence, do you agree or don't you?
Well, maybe I can get around this just a little bit. I will admit that I might not be here in the next 50 years when this tape is listened to.
By the time we're through recording, you'll probably wish you're not here.
Florence, where were you born, and where did you go to school, and who were your parents, and so on and so forth?
I was born in Franklin, and my parents were, my father was John Blackburn, who came here from Hammond. His grandfather was a Yankee in the Yankee Navy, My mother was born in Franklin, and her name was Rosa Laws. My great-great-grandfather was one of the earlier settlers in Franklin. His name was Barnett Hewlick. And, of course, I haven't listened to the tape that Billy Shin, the history that he gave, but he was one of the, listed as one of the owners bordering the original plots in the town of Franklin.
Right. And, see, you have a brother, one brother, is it?
Yes, one brother.
Also John.
Yes.
Blackburn. Where were you educated, Florence? And
in Franklin High School. I started working shortly after I finished high school.
And how many years have you been Secretary of the Chamber of Commerce, a manager?
9 years. I started in 1961.
Well, so did we. I didn't realize we had started at the same time.
Yes, Chris came here shortly after I started. In the summer. What did you say, June?
June 61.
No, see, I started in January.
What about the year 2020, Florence? What do you think is the life in Franklin's going to be like?
Oh, that'd be hard to guess. Hard to guess. I've tried to give it some thought, but to go ahead 50 years is rather hard. Naturally, I think Franklin will grow. I believe that we're here in the midst of a lot of important waterways, and I believe that by that time the Intercoastal Canal may be widened and deepened, and this might be an area of big industry. I still think, though, we're going to need to feed these people, and Franklin is in the midst of the sugar area. So it may be that rather than the other types of industry, we may need to think about feeding our population.
You brought up one question that I think particularly was important to this tape, and that's taking a look at the industry around Franklin. We have actually, I guess, one of the largest concentrations of carbon black industries in the country.
That's right. And carbon, as you know, is made from your petroleum products, oil and gas. By the way, we are often asked, what is carbon black? And I'm quite sure the people who are listening to the tape will know, but at this point there are a lot who do not know, and it's just like the soot that you see on in chimneys and the old-time oil lamps. And there's records that in ancient China it was used, and the Egyptians also had a recipe for it.
You mentioned the same stuff they find in the chimneys and the old-fashioned lamps. They probably won't know what you're talking about in the year 2020.
I'm glad she went into that. After all, you know, the blackboards have become green. Who knows but whether the carbon black will be purple by the year 2020.
Florence Blackburn, who is a manager of the Franklin Chamber of Commerce, and also was our co-chairman for the Franklin Sesquicentennial, taking a look at the Sesquicentennial, about Franklin in general, and some of her thoughts. Any final message to the year 2020, Florence?
No, I can't think of anything real earth-shaking.
Or profound.
I certainly would like to extend my best wishes and wish that I could be with you, but I don't think I will.
Well, since I plan to be there, I'll tell them hello for you. Next, we'd like to sort of take a look at current events. And a little bit later in the program, we will have a bull session, as we commonly refer to it in our age. And that's just a number of us talking about history as we saw it made in our particular generations. And I think it's interesting, since all of us here have seen the advent of the atomic age, which may be a little hard to believe, but it's true. But right now we'd kind of like to take a look at what news on KFRA sounds like in the year 1969. And for that purpose, we have just minutes ago cut off a 5-minute summary of news on the national scene from the wires of the Associated Press. It came off on regular teletype. I say regular, perhaps it won't exactly be regular in your age, in the year 2020, but in our age it's just a automated typewriter. So let's take a look at the news on this May 22nd, 1969. 70. Okay. 1970.
For KFRA in Franklin, Louisiana, this is the news.
The Nixon administration plans to ask Congress Monday for an increase of about $16 billion in the public debt ceiling. That would raise the ceiling to a record $393 billion. The so-called current temporary ceiling expires June 30th, and the limit will revert to the permanent figure of $365 billion unless Congress acts earlier. Congressional and Treasury Department sources indicate the request probably will be between $13 and $16 billion, and one Treasury official says he won't rule out anything even above that. The ceiling request is based on what Treasury and Budget Bureau experts think will be the peak debt during the coming year. Vice President Agnew again lashes out at campus demonstrators. In a speech prepared for a Texas Republican fundraising dinner, Agnew attributes campus unrest to what he calls a small, hard core of hellraisers who want to overturn the system for the sake of chaos alone. He adds, they burn, pillage, and destroy because they rebel against their lack of creativity. The Vice President claims the dissenters are encouraged by a small number of faculty members who, Agnew says, apparently cannot compete legitimately within the system or do not choose to do so. And he adds, it is my honest opinion that these hardcore of faculty and students should be identified and dismissed from the otherwise healthy body of the college community, lest they, like a cancer, destroy it. Britain has called the Arab guerrilla attack on an Israeli school bus a cruel act of terrorism. Foreign Secretary Michael Stewart promises the issue will be raised to the UN. The ambush earlier today killed 11, 8 of them children, and wounded more than 20 others. Reports from London indicate British-Israeli relations are strained. Government officials report that Israel has strongly criticized Britain for siding with Russia in a UN vote Tuesday, and the Israelis are reported embittered by Britain's advice to the United States to withhold any new warplane deliveries to Israel. President Nixon says those receiving Social Security benefits are among the hardest hit by a 5-year inflationary trend, and he urges the Senate to approve the House-passed Social Security reform measure that provides a 5% rise in payments. Nixon praised a section of the bill that would tie Social Security benefits to the cost of living. He said that would protect recipients from the uncertainties of politics and shifts of the economy. The director of the Development for the Supersonic Transport complains that the SST project is the object of unfair criticism. William Magruder of the Transportation Department claims that far from exceeding cost estimates, as has been charged, both contractors, Boeing and General Electric, are running under previous cost estimates. A Democratic congressman from Illinois, Sidney Yates, claims program costs are running $76 million above the $1.25 billion approved for the development effort, but Magruder says he's sure both contractors will keep within the current estimates. Senator J.W. Fulbright claims the Pentagon has been guilty of fraudulent press practices in Vietnam. The charge follows a report from CBS that it's been accused by the government of irresponsibility in its Vietnam coverage. Fulbright quotes the head of a Pentagon news film team in Vietnam as saying crews have staged event for the cameras. Fulbright made his charges in a letter to CBS commentator Walter Cronkite. Meanwhile, the president has left the White House for a weekend stay at Camp David in Maryland. TASS reports that recent floods in the Ukraine have killed 13 and forced 16,000 to evacuate their homes. Actress Jane Fonda, author Mark Lane, and 12 others were taken into custody at Fort Meade, Maryland today and warned they could not continue distributing anti-war literature to soldiers. Turning now to news on the local and regional scene. Funeral services are scheduled for an 85-year-old Franklin resident, Miss Clemence Crochet. Funeral services are scheduled for 10 o'clock tomorrow morning at St. John Catholic Church, with interment to follow in the church cemetery. Miss Clemence Crochet died yesterday morning at 11:10 at Foundation Hospital following a brief illness. Visitation services are currently being held at the Evangeline Funeral Home in Jeanerette. Survivors include two sisters, Mrs. Alphonse Eldridge and Mrs. Helen Louvier, both of Franklin, two brothers, Leonard of Franklin and Clay Crochet of Morgan City. With some three-quarters of the 1,200 or so teachers and other school employees of the St. Mary Parish Public School System in attendance, the vote was overwhelmingly in favor of a resolution calling for a showdown stand this fall in their effort to get higher pay. Harold Harris of Franklin, who was unanimously elected to preside over yesterday afternoon's meeting in Morgan City, estimated the main motion was carried by an affirmative vote of 99 and 99/100%. The key resolution adopted by the group pledges that the school employees will not return to their jobs when the next school term begins in September unless a full salary schedule is adopted by the state legislature is implemented by then. The St. Mary Parish Public Schools are scheduled to open the fall term August 26, and this would make it one of the earliest to open in the entire state. So all eyes should probably be focused on this parish and what happens when the school days roll around again after summer vacation. The group yesterday afternoon also overwhelmingly voted in favor of a resolution formally asking the St. Mary Parish School Board to go on record as officially opposing the state's proposed appropriation of public money to support private and parochial schools. In yet another move, the group voted to ask the school board to formally endorse the school employee stand for higher pay implementation. Harris expressed happy surprise that the turnout for the meeting was so great and there was such unanimity of consensus among all those present on the main issue at hand. The attendance was variously estimated at between 800 and 900 persons in the 1,000-seat capacity Morgan City Municipal Auditorium. The smooth-running meeting lasted about an hour, all told. 3 Louisiana youngsters, one of them from Franklin, are among this year's presidential scholars. The 3 included in yesterday's list were Joyce Bordelon and Chester Gugas, both of New Orleans, and Gary Elkins of Franklin High School. They're among 119 high school seniors selected by the Commission on Presidential Scholars for Outstanding Academic Achievement and Leadership Conference. Also in our area news, Lieutenant William Lohr of Troop C has been named Trooper of the Month for the state of Louisiana by the Louisiana State Police Award Selection Committee. Lohr also was named the second recipient of the Louisiana State Police Service Injury Award, which is presented to officers who are wounded in the performance of their duty. Colonel Stanley Berthelot, Superintendent of State Police, in presenting the awards to Lohr, so the officer's concern for the welfare of a violent mental patient and his efforts to ensure his capture without harm to the patient or any of the officers present shows Lohr to be a credit to the Louisiana State Police. Across the state, a legislative investigation committee has chosen Senator Adrian DePlanche of New Orleans to head its probe into mafia influence in state government. DePlanche was named chairman of the group. The committee was set up to investigate the charges contained in a Life magazine article last month. The first working meeting of the group will be held on Monday. Representative Carl Bauer of Franklin is also a member of the committee. A man saved the lives of his 3 sons today when his 23-foot skiff caught fire, but he lost his life in doing it. The Coast Guard said the boat caught fire in Vermilion Parish about 3 this afternoon. The man, whose identity has not been released, utilized available life jackets for his sons. He put the jackets on the boys and threw the youths overboard. He was found drowned without a jacket. That's the latest news from the wires of the Associated Press from the national, international, and local and regional scene. This is KFRA 1390, Franklin, Louisiana. And that's a look at the news as it would sound over KFRA during our regular broadcast day. I was about to give the time, and well, we're taping it right now. It's 9 minutes after 8 o'clock at night, p.m., right. And I'm a little pooped. Also,
John, I handed you a number of local articles, and we had one left over. I thought we should probably include it in there. While you catch your breath, I'm going to fill in. We've done this before, you see. This article comes from Lafayette and says, a Lafayette movie theater opens tonight with a film rated for family viewing. The Center Cinema was shut down by sheriff's deputies on Monday night for alleged obscenity in showing the film entitled The Minx. Judge Jerome DiMaggio today postponed until June 1st a hearing on the charges against the owner and manager of the theater. The judge also said that he would not forbid the theater to show other films pending the court action. I thought this might be an interesting story to listen to 50 years from now.
I just made a note in our Bull session a little bit later to take a look at the rise in the permissiveness in our society as far as our films were concerned. Used to, you had a hard time getting a Walt Disney film rated G, and now almost anything is. A little bit later in our program, we're going to take a look at the news like I had a moment ago, but in a more wide-ranging and informal session, take a look at some of the stories and some of the events that have been shaping our lives over the last few years. Also, our guest tonight is Mr. Raymond Lockett, who is a teacher in the St. Mary Parish School System and also the chairman of the Community Action Agency. And let me correct and say that Raymond is president of the St. Mary Parish Community Action Program. Raymond, first of all, let's get into this area because this is something relatively new, the Community Action Program. Perhaps you can sort of trace the recent history of the anti-poverty effort by the federal government.
Well, John, anti-poverty effort really started with President Johnson when he came up with the idea that it was time that the country would do something for our poor people. And he labeled this his war on poverty. And OEO, Office of Economic Opportunity, is just one part, one face of this war on poverty. In our community, it was started about 4 years ago with the idea and objective of trying to eliminate poverty in St. Mary Parish. We've been working along this line, but we found that it's just quite a hard job to sell the community, the whole community, on the idea that this is a community war, that it's not just for those persons who are working in the program and the few people who sat on the board of directors, but that all people in the community should be concerned about alleviating poverty in the community, and that a giant effort should be made to join hand and to try to do something about it. This is an uphill battle for us to try to sell the program. And I think if we can at one time convince the general public that community action is just what it says, getting the community to react and to act to try to alleviate poverty, that maybe we could do something in winning this war on poverty in St. Mary Parish.
Mm-hmm. Raymond, as a matter of identification for our audience in the year 2020, I'd like to say that Mr. Lockett is a Negro and is going to have a bearing on some of the questions I'm going to ask him in his reaction to some of these programs and to society today from the standpoint of a Negro and the black community. How does he feel about it? Raymond, going back to the anti-poverty effort, this is something new. It's probably the first time in the history of the United States that any effort has been made to alleviate poverty to in such a large scale that is being done now. Do you feel this is a trend?
Do I feel that the OEO program is a trend? I think it is. John, even President Nixon, who at one time had doubts about the program, have found that probably the poor need someone to speak for them, and that probably OEO, or especially the local unit, would be the mouthpiece for the poor, and that with this type of organization trying to get the community, everyone else in the community, looking at the problem, that probably the local community could take the step to alleviate poverty, to help the poor.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the programs that the Community Action Agency is doing at the present time?
Well, we have various programs. One is Head Start that works with the small kids, to try to bring them up to date with
These are preschool kids.
These preschool kids, so that once they enter school, they might be able to compete with the students or the kids from the family that will have a little more money, that have a little better background. It was found that a poor kid starting school starts behind the influential kid, and that he stays behind probably the rest of his life. And they hope that Head Start would give them this type of head start, so that once he enters the first grade, that he would be in a position to start on par with the other kids, and that he could stay with them from there on. Mm-hmm. This is only one program. Another program we have is Neighborhood Service Center, which encompasses quite a few programs. This is a program that is supposed to bring the services to the poor people. We have under Neighborhood Service Center emergency food and medical program, and we found in St. Mary Parish, contrary to belief in the parish, that we have people who are starving, we have people who need medical care, and the emergency food and medical program can get the aid to these people without going through a lot of red tape. Many of our agencies will turn their head and say, this just doesn't exist in the parish, when we could document families that are going to the garbage can daily to try to get food, and family who are losing children, and mothers who are almost at the point of death because they cannot get medical supply, and many of our doctors within the area will fail to treat them. This program will try to get the type of help we need for these people right now, and the red tape could be worked out for something later. We also have community planning program that will go into the community and try to organize the community so that these people will know where to go to get the type of help they need, and that they could also, as a group, as an organization, put some pressure on the people who are supposed to help them. We have a new program, a job placement program that we've just been funded for, where we will have a director who will try to find an individual who needs a job and then go out and try to find a job for this particular individual. We also have our staff that will coordinate all of these programs. And now we are working on a youth development program that will take the young poor kids, put them out into the community, and give them the type of experience that will provide them with the tools to be good citizen and productive citizen in this community.
Mm-hmm. Raymond, perhaps in the year 2020, it isn't too surprising to them to see back in ancient history like we are to them that there is poverty and such. But in our day and age, it's sometimes a little hard to believe, because here we have the highest standard of living in the world today in America. And here in Franklin, of course, we have probably a large middle class who have what we consider luxurious homes, air conditioning, two cars, and such as this. And yet your group works with poverty, and this is sort of an anachronism in our society today. Maybe we just don't want to admit it. Of course, the majority of the poverty people you work with are Negroes. Do you also have? Do you find poverty among whites also?
You know, John, this is one of the great faults in St. Mary Parish, that we really look upon poverty as being black. You have poor whites in St. Mary Parish. We have a few poor whites who really participate in the program. Many of them would like to participate, but because of pressure from their peer, they would rather stay away from the program rather than participate because of what their neighbors might say or their neighbors' neighbors might say. And I think if we could dispel of the idea that poverty and black would go together in St. Mary Parish, we probably could get the whole community working toward solving this particular problem. We've been working daily to try to really get this type of line of communication to the poor whites, and that we might have this type of joining hand, if I could use this word, between the poor white and the poor black in trying to make the community see that this is a problem of St. Mary Parish.
Now, this leads me to my next question, is what, in this day and age of plenty, what do you feel are the prime factors in having a poverty level?
Well, there are many factors in having poor people. Number one, I think, would probably be apathy on the part of the community. I think we've operated under the old theory that a person was poor because this person was lazy, or because the person just had no desire to do better for so long that we actually believe it. And we fail to really get into the basic problem of poverty, which could be poor education, or no jobs, could be many factors that could cause a person to be poor. And instead of touching on these problems that cause poverty, we would like to use the catchphrase, the person is poor because he's lazy. Therefore, if he's lazy, I would like to have nothing to do with him, and it is not my responsibility to try to help this person to pull himself up out of this rut that he's in.
Mm-hmm. Raymond, let's switch a little bit and, like all of our guests, ask you a little bit about yourself. Give us a little personal history. When were you born, your parents, etc.?
Well, I was born in St. Mary Parish in a little town about 13 miles from here. Well, I don't mean a little town, a little village by the name of Four Corners. My father and mother is Jacob and Velma Lockett. I was educated in the school system of St. Mary Parish. My first 8 years of school was in the Catholic school, and I attended high school in Franklin, school that is now known as Park Avenue.
Mm. You are married?
I am married with 2 daughters.
Your wife's name?
Eileen Banks.
Nice. And what do you do for a living?
Right now I am a teacher coach at Park Avenue.
Good. We want to get into another area with Mr. Lockett a little bit later, and that is the role in society today of the black man, and especially since so much attention has been focused in these last few years upon the discrimination against Negroes. We're going to get in that a little bit also. Chris,
can I bring in a word, John? I'm glad that you told our audience of 2020 that Raymond is a Negro. I was going to go into that a little bit, and I was going to put it a little different because at this particular juncture of history, there's a certain change coming about in regards to this term Negro, and of course changes are coming very fast, and many would say furiously these days. Right at this point in history, it is becoming more popular from the members of the Negroid race to be referred to as, I'm sure Raymond will agree with me, a black man instead of a Negro. And this is an interesting thing to we who are on a passing scene of history. So I was going to say that Raymond is a black man, and I was going to say that John Petrie and myself are coonies. And Florence Blackburn is a lady about town of 1970. I was going to say she was a member of the aristocracy of Franklin. Maybe she'd have another term that she'd like to put it in. We'll leave that up to her since she's the only lady on the panel. We're going to say that Dr. Fernandez is not only the mayor, but he's one of the many rich doctors in the community. And Mr. Billy Shin, John, I'll have to let you classify Billy. You tape recorded him.
I was answering the phone at the same time. Abstractor, is that what you wanted?
An abstractor, but
his livelihood.
I was going to say, I said Florence was a member of the aristocracy of the community. All being on the light side, of course. Here they may question what I'm saying. But myself and, well, I'll come back to myself later. John, you've asked, while we're waiting for the doctor, you've asked these people to say something about themselves. I was going to ask you, this is a good time for you to insert that, to tell us about where you were hatched and so forth.
I was hatched, as you say, Chris, in the bustling metropolis that became famous through a record many years ago called Big Mamu, and actually Mamu, Louisiana. I don't know in 2020 if it'll still be on the map or not, sort of like Raymond's Four Corners, you know.
And there's a very popular song that was popular recently. I just wonder if we have the record on hand, but proceed. We'll think about that more.
Recently, I remember many years ago, Life magazine had sent down a team of photographers when the song Big Mamu became very popular, and they couldn't find it, but...
Well, you know, when you're speaking in terms of 50 years, we can refer to these days as recent history.
But I was raised in Ville-Platte most of my life. That's where I spent most of my life. And my father was John Major Petrie Sr., and my mother was the former Mary Guillory. And my mother was from the community of Easton, Louisiana. My daddy was born and raised in in Welch, which is by Jennings, Louisiana, and I popped up in Mamu in 1936, December 17th. Matter of fact, about mid-morning, I think. Daddy always said around coffee time, which I think was around 9 o'clock in those days. And as I said, grew up in Ville-Platte, attended
before they had daylight savings.
And was educated in Ville-Platte through the parochial and public schools there in Ville-Platte. I was also attended University of Southwestern for a while, and was in the United States Air Force, and married the former Peggy Blanchard here in Franklin. And we've been married for, I think, let me see, 6 years come June 1st, just a few days from now. So that pretty much brings me up to date.
Well, John, do you remember how you went into radio? It was some years back in Ville-Platte. You touched on that a little bit. Did you go in it by accident, or did you plan it this way? Or?
Well, I planned it in the early days. In my later years, I sort of fell into it. While in high school, I became very interested in radio and the technical side of radio, and one of my close friends was J.L. Sylvester, who is the chief engineer at KVPI and also an engineer at KLFY TV in Lafayette, Channel 10. And he was the chief engineer at KEUN in Eunice at the time, and I would visit with him and learned about electronics, pretty much just reading about it and learning a little bit from him, KEUN. I started in radio. Some of our staff here finds it hard to believe, but I started in radio for no pay. I worked at night, and I wasn't paid for it. Matter of fact, I had to sort of sneak in to be able to do it. And then continue that until high school. And when I went into the service, I went to school in radio, shall we say, in electronics. And coming out of the service, started at Southwestern, and just in an engineering course, not electronics, coincidentally. And then attended there for some time, and when I say I fell into radio, it's because I caught pneumonia one winter, and I had to drop out, and while recuperating, an opening became available at KVPI in Ville-Platte, where Chris, the same Chris Duplichan, incidentally, was manager there. And I started part-time while waiting for school to start again.
He'd get in the way more than anything else, and we finally put him on mic, and look what he turned out to be.
And about that time, I think, Chris, you were planning on coming over here to Franklin, and you approached me about coming over here with you.
Yes.
About in '58, I think, and it took about 3 years before the station was finally built. I came to Franklin on April 1st, April Fool's Day, 1961.
And that has bugged me ever since.
So that's how I got into radio.
I wanted to... Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to switch into another area, unless you want to...
Before we do that, I think I want to go into this. I mentioned this term, black man, a while ago, and I wanted to ask Raymond to touch on this. He being the black man on the panel today. What is the significance of the emergence of this term to replace the term of Negro that up to now has been probably the mode of speaking that the members of your race has, I think, preferred?
Well, Chris, if we look back at the term Negro, there is only one place in the world where a black man has been called Negro, and this is in the United States. In Africa, they are called Africans. In another place, they are called black or some other color. Negro was given to the black man in the United States, and actually it's a Spanish word that means black. But in the United States, we speak English, so we might as well call it by its English name. But the word Negro has many stigma to it. Many people claim they cannot pronounce it, and they go into the other word. They say that Negroes were lazy, that they were ignorant, and many of the other stigma. And by repeating this, many of the young black people and many of the old started believing this. And the word itself had this sort of degrading aspect on black people. So they felt that the term should be changed, and that since we were black, that we should refer to ourselves as black, something with some substance, and that by referring to ourselves as black, that we could regain some of the pride, some of the dignity that we should have, that we had, well, way back in, I guess we would have to go back through the history of Africa, but that this would give us something basic to move into, that when you look at Negro as an adjective, it really means nothing. So black is just the opposite of white. We don't know of any real white man, just like we don't know of any real black man. So black would really give us something to move forward in, something that we can be proud of. And many of our people are now accepting the term black as having some dignity to it. Mm.
I started to say a moment ago that John and I called ourselves coonies nowadays, and there was a time when we probably would have resented this term more than we do in 1970. And
well, I still do if somebody calls me that in the wrong way.
And the term, I think the term that, I'm sure the term that Raymond had in mind was the term nigger. And he says that there was a closeness in the terms, and some people, it was not always clear whether they meant to say one or the other, and it was an area of possible confusion and possible misunderstanding when it's used. I can well appreciate the term, and I should well imagine that, I should hope, if I may editorialize that way, that by the year 2020, the term nigger is going to be as easy to live with as the term coonie today to us Cajuns. Do you feel that way, Raymond?
I don't feel that the term nigger will ever be easy to live with. The term Negro probably will be in 50 years from now. But here again, the term nigger has always been used to have some degrading effect upon a black man. It has never been used to see him as a man. So I don't think black people will ever really accept the term nigger. Maybe Negro, but not nigger.
In other words, to state it a different way as I see it as a white man, when somebody calls you a nigger, he means to deride you. Whereas when he uses the term nigger or negro, you're not positively sure what he means. Well, if he uses the term black man, you'd be more comfortable without knowing what the man is thinking or what his philosophy is.
Right, because when he used the word nigger, you know what he's thinking.
We want to get into a couple of other areas right now. We have on tape recording Mr. William Shin, who we identified earlier as an abstractor and also our unofficial historian. Mr. Shin couldn't be with us tonight. He could have. He said he would be, but it was a little difficult for him since he had to be in Baton Rouge tonight also. And so yesterday I made a tape recording with Mr. Shin in two different areas. The first tape deals with the early history of Franklin and up to recent times, and then a little bit later in the program we'll go into another area where we asked Mr. Shin's what he thought the year 2020 would be like, and he had some interesting observations. First of all, we started off our first tape recording with Mr. Shin, asking Billy to tell us a little bit about how Franklin started and something about our early settlers.
The Franklin area was settled very early in its history, primarily under the Spanish administration. Most of the settlers were designated as American, a term that was then used locally to distinguish between Creoles, natives, French, and Acadian immigrants. These so-called Americans came from such diverse places as Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, and as far away as Connecticut. They were merchants, traders, doctors, some few were planters, but as a rule, the itinerant workers didn't come till later. The outstanding thing when we look at these early names is we find very few of the familiar names that we do find in our current times. The background of the history of the immediate area of Franklin, briefly, is this. James Hewling, who laid out the settlement now covered by the settlement of Franklin, came from Montgomery County, Tennessee. He sold Isaac Reed, April 13, 1813, the tract where now the Blevins, Bellow, and Skelfel properties are. In that deed, it is declared that the house of William Goforth, who later became a judge here, was situated on this tract. No one really knows whether Hewling gave the name Franklin or Alexander Lewis, to whom he sold February 17, 1814. In that deed, he required that Lewis respect the sales he had made to Reed, and especially the one to Ferguson on the east side of what is now the courthouse square, which was then called the Tan Yard. He required Lewis set aside one square often for public use. Lewis outdid him and set apart 4 arpents. Lewis made up a plan which he declared did not coincide with the lots made by Hewling. Unfortunately, no copy of this plan or of any plan, whether made by Hewling or anyone else, is now in existence. My theory is that the name Franklin was no doubt given because Lewis came from Williamson County, Tennessee, which was the county seat of which was Franklin. The first lots were sold April 18, 1814 to a man named Henry Lyon, and are where the present Worms Store building now stands. The first sale in which the name Franklin appears was dated May 7, 1815. I referred a while ago to the fact that so many of the names are not what we know today. For example, between the beginning date of his sales in 1820, the names of the persons to whom Lewis sold bore these names: John Rice, William Hungerford, John Rose, Jacob Hafley, Andrew McLean, John Moore, Honorary Carlin, Hilary Carlin, John LaBarth, William Whaley, Joshua Rogers, Oliver Wilson, Joshua Gibson, Purnell Reddish, Christopher Bryan, Peter Robert, George Allen, Robert MacDonald, James D. Morris. Anyone can readily notice the great predominance of English, Irish, and Scotch names and the scarcity of French names, which seems unusual as most people think we are in the French area. In addition, men who were here but not property owners at that time were Stephen Barabino, a merchant who was an Italian, Dr. A. Thruston, an Englishman, Dr. R. Levine, a Frenchman, Joseph Charpentier, the sheriff, who was no doubt French, and Matthew Nemo, origin unknown.
You spoke a moment ago about the fact that not very many French names in early Franklin history, and yet you just go a little to the west of us and you run into a large French settlement. This is the St. Martinville settlement, and branching down into New Iberia and all. The early Franklin settlers, which route did they travel to reach this area?
Well, the largest number of them did not come from the northern route, which would have been by way of St. Martinville. They came by 2 routes which were more southerly. Initially, they came by way of the Mississippi, either from New Orleans on the south or Natchez or Baton Rouge areas on the north. And from those directions, they would go by one of 2 directions. They would go to Donaldsonville at the mouth of the Bayou Lafourche, then go down the Bayou Lafourche to the canal to Lake Verret, which was about at where Napoleonville now is. They would then journey across Lake Verret and Lake Palourde through Grassy Lake to the Chapelai River and via Teche to what we now call Patterson, but was at that time called Dutch Settlement. The distance was approximately 61 miles from Donaldsonville. By that land, they could then go from Dutch settlement to where the courthouse of St. Mary now is, 21 miles, making the whole journey approximately 164 miles from New Orleans. Another route from New Orleans went to the mouth of the Bay of Plaquemine at Plaquemine, then through Bay of Plaquemine to Lake Natchez and the Chafly River, into Lake Chitimacha and the mouth of the Teche, and again up the water of the Teche to the Franklin area. This was approximately 206 miles. These routes are set out in a book by William Darby, published in 1818, entitled The Immigrant's Guide, which he published to assist settlers in arriving at these areas. There was also a northerly route by which they could go around to Lake Foss Point Landing into St. Martinville and then to New Iberia, but this was somewhat longer.
Yeah, going back, I have a question about these early settlers. Were these settlers primarily farmers looking for land, new land to develop, or were they trappers or fishermen?
Most of them were farmers. They were agricultural men. At that time, the basic crops and commodities were cotton, cane, and indigo. And some farmers specialized in one, some tried one, gave up, tried another. But as sugarcane developed and the process of refining became more specialized, the area tended to graduate primarily into cane, and cotton was relegated to the further northern areas towards Opelousas and areas to that section of the state.
Mm-hmm. In these early days, did we have these plantations as we know them today?
In those days, any man who had more than 100 acres called himself a plantation owner. And actually, initially, the distinction of the plantation owner was more or less derived from the labor on the place. If a man had slaves or hired labor, he considered himself a plantation owner. Otherwise, if he farmed a small place himself, he just called himself a farmer. The plantations themselves did not exist in such large numbers in huge extents as we found them later on, because the land grants were made by the Spanish government to assist the settlers in coming to this area. And most of the grants were of about 10 arpents front, which was about equivalent of what 8 acres front would be, or about 16 to 1,700 feet, going back 40 arpents depth from the water course. And this was considered as the basic grant to a man with his family. Of course, there are exceptions. There were some few grants which were very, very large, and these were primarily political favors, or for some specific reason, as someone establishing what they would call a vacherie, which was a cattle ranch to supply meat to the city of New Orleans and areas where a large number of people resided. But as the area grew, when we get into the 1820s and 30s, that was when the period of the rise of the plantations began, as we would call a plantation, because the holdings were consolidated among owners and families, where they would acquire the lands around them and put them into one large ownership, in where you'd have thousands of acres fall into one family. And those, some are still intact to this date, not necessarily in the same family, but the extent is pretty much exactly what it was at that time.
Mm-hmm. Each of our guests on the special tape recording for 50 years into the future, we ask them to give us some background about themselves, because we kind of feel their their progeny will find it interesting to hear what we were like and exactly what our roots were. So our guest, as we said, is Mr. William T. Shen. And Billy, how about a little bit about your roots? Where were you born, parents, what are you doing, and so on and so forth?
I'm almost 54 years old. I was born in Baldwin, and my parents, father's name was Thomas Shen, my mother's name was Lorena Robichaud. My father, at that time, worked in lumber mills. He later became an insurance agent when the lumber mills in Baldwin closed down, and we lived in Franklin most of our young days. I spent practically all my life here, except for a period of about 7 years when I worked away in Baton Rouge and New Orleans areas doing work for the United States Engineer Department. But almost all my working life has been devoted to land title work in courthouse records, for oil companies and individuals and persons requiring examination of titles. And that's what gave rise to my interest in a great bit of this historical background of anything I work on, because I have collected quite an extensive library of my own and specializing in Louisiana history. But I also believe that the great part of our history has really never been written, because it's buried in all the various records all through the state, and it's only by the persistence of people who will give it the time and the effort to dig it out that we'll someday have it all put together. But it's sometimes an unrewarding task, and you have to do it for the love of it, and sometimes you wonder if somebody really cares when you've done it all. But I don't regret ever having done it, and I've lived here, as I say, all my life, and I like the area, and the people are fine, and I think anybody will find wherever he goes that if he gets along with things and likes things, he'll find that no matter where he goes, he'll think that that place is the finest place he could be.
Well, a little bit more about your personal life, Billy. You're married, and how many kids? Who is your wife?
I'm married to the farmer Verna Carpenter, who is from Ascension Parish. I have 2 children, Margaret Ann, who resides in California, and she is married, and at present has 1 little boy and is expecting another, which incidentally the boy is the first boy in 53 years in my direct line, so therefore we are quite proud of him. And I have another daughter, Elizabeth Jane, who is not now married and is a graduate student at the University of Minnesota. So even though I'm a way down south southerner, I've wound up with 1 westerner and 1 far northerner in my family.
Well, maybe at least the other daughter will come back here and marry a native southerner and at least be close to home.
Possibly.
I want to make this comment because Mr. Shin mentioned a moment ago about history being what it is. Most of it you read in the history books isn't really history because it's just very superficial. Most of the history we're interested in, like during our sesquicentennial, has been local history, and you don't find too much written about it. And it was brought up during our sesquicentennial celebration and our prior conversations with Mr. Shin that he has been interested in putting all of his notes in his extensive library as he talks in some cohesive form, probably a book or something, and we certainly would applaud that. And so 50 years from now, if you do have a history, we're kind of putting him on the spot for the future. We hope to encourage him enough to get that history written of St. Mary Parish, or you'll have something a little bit more concrete than this tape recording to go by 50 years from now. Billy, let's bring it up to recent time. What about today in Franklin? What changes have you seen from, say, the past to the present?
Well, first of all, the economic change, I think, is the greatest. We've seen an agricultural area, which has always depended primarily on agricultural resources, change almost within a short time into an industrialized area relying on natural resources of oil and gas, which provides large employment, brings in a good amount of income to the area. It has changed our way of living, has brought in large numbers of outside persons who have changed the makeup of the area, I think for the good, because it has brought in a mixture of all kinds of people with all manners of thinking and ways. And all things, I believe, work together to an end. Another thing that we've had is, of course, a vast sociological change, because in the recent years we've had our way of living, as has been known in the South, has been changed with desegregation, and some have met it passively, some violently, some have tried to use common sense, but it in itself being such a change from a background of over 100 years, it has naturally wrought a great deal of unsettlement. But actually, we can be proud that in our area we have really had a minimum of difficulty with it insofar as I have been able to see. There may be undercurrents of which none of us is aware or which none of us wish to see, but I believe that really we can be proud overall of the fact that we have come through a dangerous, difficult period with a minimum of difficulties and divisions of opinion, which bring about dissensions which sometimes never can be healed by time.
What other area, you mentioned sociological, this could also take in the political scene.
Well, the political scene, too, has had a major change in the last generation, because the South traditionally has always stood in the history and in the minds of the people as an area of individualism and basically that, to wrap it up in one term, states' rights, which covers a multitude of things, but fundamentally means that an individual is entitled to his rights up to a certain limit and will allow only a federal supervision to a limited degree. However, in this past generation, we've seen an ever-encroaching federal system which is smothering all individual rights everywhere, and if it continues in its present form, will either completely blot out any hope of us achieving any satisfactory compromise of opinion that I can see.
Let's go back just a moment and bring in local history up to recent times. You mentioned how some of these large plantations have remained virtually intact, if not under the same ownership, at least in area. Do you see today a trend away from these large plantations to where they're getting too expensive, or taxes is eating up profits or something? Do you see them slowly disintegrating?
Well, some of the larger plantations that we know now have become corporations or owned by corporate structures. The individual farmers still exist in our area, but with cost and things as they are now, it is, I think, very difficult to see how an individual can surmount the tremendous obstacles that are in the way of a person maintaining on his own the large amounts of land and labor that are necessary to keep one of these going.
We'll be back a little bit later and ask Mr. Shin, from the role of a historian, to look 50 years into the future and see what he foresees. Next on our program, we'd just like to read something for you that we have on KFRA every day. It's called our Community Bulletin Board, and we use it to alert our listeners as to what activities will be taking place during the day. This is aired on KFRA every hour on the 3/4 hour mark. And for this Friday, May 22nd, these reminders to our listeners. The Verdinville Elementary School will hold closing exercises and honor night tonight at 8 o'clock in the school cafetorium. Guest speaker will be Mrs. J.V. Jones, former teacher at Verdinville. The Teche Riding Club Horse Show, scheduled for 7:30 tonight, has been canceled due to the inclement weather we've been having. The St. Joseph Home and School Association will hold a meeting in the school cafeteria in Jeanerette tonight at 7:30. Election of officers will be held. This afternoon, you can hear a 25-minute tape of yesterday's St. Mary Parish School Board employee meeting at 5:15 today on KFRA. All Teche Little League games for today have been rescheduled for tomorrow afternoon, beginning at 2. All managers are asked to be at the concession stand tonight at 6 o'clock. The Consoling Clouds of Joy will be at the First Jerusalem Baptist Church in Jeanerette tonight at 8 o'clock. This is sponsored by the Parents Committee of Boy Scout Troop 744. Advance tickets $1, at the door $1.25. For tickets, call Mrs. Frances Antoine at 276-6423 in Jeanerette. Franklin Little League baseball game scheduled for this evening has been postponed until 2, as we mentioned earlier. And the Trinity Methodist Church in Baldwin will have a rummage sale tomorrow at the church. Quite a bit going on around in our area today and tonight. Well, Chris, it's your turn. We've just about talked about our past history and personal history. Where do you come from, and why?
In the year 2020, unless science does something drastic, I will be 95, which means...
unless something? science does something drastic, or
Yeah,
you think if science does, you'll still be here?
You're right. If the scientists come out with something, because I don't feel I'll make it up to 95, short of some help. But at any rate, this means I'm 45 years of age now, and I was born, therefore, in 1924 in a little country community called Durald, and that's D-U-R-A-L-D, northwest of Eunice, about 10 miles, and about 10 miles southwest of Big Mamou, as John referred to our town a moment ago. My parents were Mr. and Mrs. Francois Duplechamp. My father died 4 years ago. My mother's still living and lives in Eunice. We were farm people. We were 9 children, 7 sons and 2 daughters, and my father was a general farmer. But on into my education, it started out in a little 4-room schoolhouse in the country in Dural. Then I graduated from there in the 5th grade, went on to Big Mamou, and finished high school there in 1946. Then went on to Southwestern, where I stayed for 5 confused years, studying everything from dancing to speech to home economics. You wouldn't believe it, would you, Florence? But I did take a course in home economics and finished getting a degree in education, secondary education, in 1951, following which I went to school in Europe, more specifically at Nottingham University in England, under a Fulbright scholarship in the year 51 and 2. Following that, I came home and cast about for a job, hoping to find something that I like to do but not to teach, because I had learned when I was doing my practice teaching that I did not like that. After being home about 2 weeks, I saw a little article in the Eunice News that told about a radio station being put up in Eunice. And I had studied radio too, incidentally, in college. I had been active in the radio workshop there, more out of love than anything else, but I think it tied in with the speech in which I minored. I had gotten a taste of the microphone, and in spite of the fact I knew I had a lot of problems to overcome with the French accent that I had and still have to some extent, I suppose, I had a love and I wanted to get into that, but I had really never had entertained any hope of being in radio, because, well, I just didn't think that there would ever be radio close enough to me for it to be accessible to me. But anyhow, any old way, I went to Eunice and looked up the people who were putting the station up in Eunice, and I was very quickly hired because they found out I could speak French, interestingly enough. So they hired me as more than anything else, I'm sure, although they didn't tell me that then, as their French newsman, and I gave a French newscast in the morning and one in the afternoon for several months. And I was also a salesman, and I was quite successful right initially with selling. Of course, I think anybody would have been, because there was no TV yet, and radio was still very much in a class by itself in Eunice. But so successful was the station there that the same people immediately applied for a station in Wiltz, and I didn't know this until some time later, and 8 months after I had been in Eunice, they got the license and asked me if I would go to Wiltz to manage the station. The Eunice station was and still is KEUN, incidentally. We put the Wiltz station on the air in 1952, and I managed that station for 9 years, and married my secretary at KVPI in Wiltz, Laura Lou Swallow, a few months after we opened the station. And of course then, like you said a while ago, we opened up KFRA in Franklin in 1961. And Laura Lou and myself and 2 of our children who were then born, Mike and Virginia, moved on to Franklin, and we've been here ever since. And since then we have had 2 more children, Christine and Sandra. And that's where we are today. I'm Executive Vice President and General Manager, I believe I said that already, and part owner of KFRA. And we have enjoyed our stay in Franklin so far, and it's not been the greatest paying thing I've done in my life, perhaps up till now, but I still have hopes that it will be good in the future. I'm enjoying it at any rate.
Well, you said a moment ago you were at USL on the radio workshop out of love, and so you can say you're doing this out of love. What I wanted to ask
For
you, though,
necessity.
you said you were in the radio workshop at USL because of love. I didn't know whether you meant love of radio or because there was a girl involved in the scheme of things.
Mr. Albert Computer was our instructor. You don't know Mr. Computer, but he's not a girl. And we had some interesting moments there, I'm sure, in the old workshop. I believe that brings me up to date. I wanted to mention this. One of our slogans on KFRA that we are very proud to use in our programming is KFRA in Franklin, Louisiana's only 4 times cleanest city. And we are attached to this wording because it means a great deal to us, since that is one thing, among others, that Franklin is the only one in the state of. Only 4 times cleanest city. Perhaps we'll come back to Florence after a while and she'll remember which years Franklin came out first. I know that the doctor has joined us now, and we'll probably have some comments from him. Are you ready to talk to Dr. Fernandez?
Mm-hmm.
The mayor of Louisiana's only 4 times cleanest city?
Yes, I'm ready. Good evening. I'm happy to be here.
You realize, of course, you're talking to the people of 2020.
Well, I'm talking. I don't know who's going to be listening to it. I hope it's 2020.
Dr. Fernandez is Dr. J.M. Fernandez, and he is, of course, one of the doctors in Franklin, medical doctors and surgeon.
He didn't hear
at Franklin Foundation Hospital.
How I referred to him a while ago. So out of fairness, I suppose we'll have to repeat it, since we have to give equal time.
Spare me that. Spare me that. You'll embarrass me with these bouquets.
We said Dr. Fernandez, of course, being a doctor, was one of the many rich doctors in town.
Yeah, I knew there'd be some
We'll give
bouquets.
you equal time.
That's before taxes, naturally.
Yeah.
Before the stock market fell, too.
That's something we'll have to discuss in our bull session a little bit later, is the stock market. But and how many people have lost a fortune, I think, over the last year or so. Dr. Fernandez is also mayor of the city of Franklin. And Doc, let's take a look at the history of Franklin, especially during the last 2 years that you've been mayor.
John, I don't know which particular aspect of the city you would like to stress. I feel that we've made strides forward. I feel that we've taken a fresh look at the responsibilities of the municipality from economic, from a sociologic standpoint. I feel that we've made some progress in this respect. I hope that my successors can continue this same vein, and that I can refer to my administration as a transitional one, one in which we made a step in another direction, and the road has led to greater accomplishments.
During these last few years in particular, municipalities, not only Franklin but across the state and across the country for that purpose, have had an onslaught of massive problems of growth, of utility systems, of taxation, annexation, and such. What could you sort of recap as mayor some of the problems facing municipalities today that will have to be solved in the foreseeable future?
Yes, I believe I could. I think the way to look at it is from the standpoint of the individual citizen. When he refers to the government in a general term, ordinarily he thinks of the closest government to him, and of course this is his municipal government. These are the men, these are the people that provide services or don't provide services. These are the agencies which collect taxes, which provide the collection of solid waste material, of sewerage, and provide the streets for him to roll on and the sidewalks for the family to walk on, and provide the schools, etc., and so on, and ad infinitum. When they refer to the state government or the federal government, it is in a sort of a nebulous manner. They look upon the state and federal governments more or less as a great white father, so to speak, some agency that is going to bequeath some gratuities to them. But the day-to-day living has to be on a municipal or even a parochial level for the smaller cities. And I believe that the big problem of the future is going to be how one can reconcile these needs of the individuals and the particularly needy groups of people, but down to the individual basis in each consideration. How are we going to reconcile these with and interrelate this with governmental agencies on a higher level? Specifically, how is the municipality going to work with the parochial government, they say the police jury or whatever system of parish-wide government will prevail? How will you get along with the local school boards? How will you get along with state agencies that supervise or set standards for these parochial or municipal agencies? And again, to the higher level, how are these going to be interrelated with the federal agencies? This is a tremendous problem. And intertwined in all of this is the financial basis for providing these services. As long as the federal and state governments are able to take the cream off of the milk, so to speak, take the top of the tax dollar, and not provide services on a personal, individual basis, it's going to become extremely difficult for municipalities to continue providing this service. The municipalities specifically must find some manner of getting revenue to provide these services that I just referred to. And it's extremely difficult in our present concept of government. I'm sure you realize that no taxes can be levied on a municipal level without a referendum of the people involved. However, taxes can be raised on a state or federal level by initiation and completion, if you will, in the state house, the legislature, or in the Congress. But here the municipalities are responsive to the whims, if you will, of the average citizen. And these individuals, if they want certain services, they must realize that it's going to cost a certain amount of money to provide it. And they will be called upon to provide these funds over and above what is taken away from them by state and federal agencies. And herein lies the crux of the whole problem, I believe.
Mayor Fernandez, would you sort of describe to us something about our present form of city government? How is it arrived at, who serves it for how long, and what comprises it, and how the decisions are made?
Yes, our present city government is aldermanic, if you will. 5 councilmen are elected at large from the municipal, within the corporate limits of the municipality, and of course 1 mayor. The mayor is in essence, the executive officer, and the councilmen are the policy-making board. We have recently set up a city court which acts as the judiciary for the municipality. And this is more or less a similar arrangement to the state government and the federal government. Of course, it's on the local level. There are several other choices available, and perhaps the citizens of the future may want to change this form of government. There are statutes, state statutes, which do permit changing of the form of municipal government, and the requirements are set out in these statutes.
We're just about out of tape on this tape recording. We've been roughly an hour and 22 or 3 minutes. So we're going to take a slight break and change tape recording and continue with our discussion with Dr. Fernandez and his role as doctor.